The moon hung low over the arid New Mexico landscape, casting long shadows across the winding dirt road. Javier had heard whispers of La Llorona, the weeping woman, for years, but the old stories were just that, stories, or so he thought. After an argument with his family, he decided to drive out to the river alone, needing the solitude. The night was eerily still as he parked his truck near the water's edge. He stepped out, the dry earth crunching beneath his boots. The Rio Grande stretched before him, a dark, silent ribbon under the starlight sky. Javier stood by the water for a while, his thoughts drifting aimlessly. Then he heard it, a soft, mournful cry, drifting over the water like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was a trick of the night, a noise carried from some distant part of the riverbank. But the cry came again, this time louder, unmistakable. A woman's wail. Javier took a step closer to the water, his pulse pounding in his ears. The cry grew louder, closer, as if the woman was standing just on the other side of the river, hidden by the darkness. Then, through the trees on the far bank, he saw her. A figure in white, moving slowly along the edge of the water. Her long, wet hair clung to her face, and her arms were outstretched as if searching. The woman's cries grew desperate, her voice carrying the unbearable weight of grief and loss. Javier froze, his blood ran cold as he realized that she was moving towards him, her figure becoming clearer with each step. He could see the hollow look in her eye, the mournful expression that seemed to radiate centuries of sorrow. The cry came again, and this time it was a scream that cut through the night air, raw with pain. Without thinking, Javier turned and ran, his feet pounding against the earth, the sound of the weeping woman following him, growing louder with each passing second. By the time he had reached his truck, the sound had stopped. The night was still again, as if nothing happened. He didn't dare look back. As he sped away, Javier's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his mind racing. He knew, without a doubt, that La Llorona was no mere legend. She was real, and she would forever haunt the quiet corners of the riverbank, waiting for the next soul to cross her path. The sun had barely set over Staten Island, casting an eerie glow across the thick woods that bordered the old abandoned mental asylum. For years, the name Cropsey had haunted the whispers of local children, an urban legend about a monstrous figure who stalked the forest, dragging kids into the shadows. It was just a story, a scary tale meant to keep children in line. At least that's what Jackson thought, as he and his friends dared each other to venture closer to the infamous building. Jackson could feel the temperature drop as they crossed the threshold into the courtyard, the darkness creeping in with the sun setting. The building was a maze of decaying hallways and broken windows, filled with the ghost of its past, forgotten screams, the heavy air of suffering. They explored the halls cautiously, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Faded photographs lined the walls, twisted metal and shattered glass littered the floors. But as they ventured deeper into the asylum's belly, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. Jackson's heart began to race. The others were ahead, laughing nervously, their voices hollow in the vast emptiness. But something felt off. There was a shift in the air, a presence, just beyond their sight, something lurking in the dark corners of the building. A distant scraping sound had reached their ears, unnerving and relentless, like claws dragging across concrete. He turned a corner, and for a split second his flashlight caught something, a shadow, tall and hunched, moving between the broken walls. His pulse quickened, his instinct screaming to run. But he didn't. He moved closer, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the darkness. Then out of the corner of his eye he saw it, a figure tall and grotesque, with matted hair and hollow eyes. Jackson watched the figure, its movements deliberate and unnervingly calm as it disappeared into the darkness. A cold sweat ran down his back, and without thinking, he turned and bolted down the hall, shouting for his friends. They rushed towards him, eyes wide with fear, but Jackson didn't stop. The scraping sound had followed them, growing louder as they neared the exit. He could feel the presence closing in just behind them, as if Cropsey himself was haunting them through the twisted corridors. The group burst into the night, breathless, not stopping until they were far from the asylum, standing under the open sky. As they looked back at the silhouette of the building against the night, Jackson realized one terrifying truth. Cropsey was no mere story. He was real, and he still haunted the abandoned halls, waiting for his next careless soul to venture too close. In the heart of North Carolina, the dense forests surrounding Bladenboro were thick with mystery. It was the fall of 1953, and a quiet chill hung in the air. People spoke in hushed tones about something lurking in the shadows, something that hadn't been seen but was very much felt. The Beast of Bladenboro, they called it, a creature as elusive as it was terrifying. The town had been rocked by reports of dead animals that had been drained of their blood, their bodies mutilated in strange ways. Pets and livestock had vanished overnight, leaving only the eerie silence of a forest that seemed to hold its breath. Locals whispered that it was no ordinary predator. It was something more. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the town, a man named John decided to venture into the woods. He had heard the stories, but he believed them to just be that, stories. His lantern flickered as he walked deeper into the forest, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant howls echoing through the trees. The further he went, the more the forest seemed to close in on him, its shadows stretching unnaturally long. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. The air grew thick, suffocating. The faintest rustle caught his ear, and he turned, heart pounding. There, in the distance, something large moved between the trees, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the shape of a beast, towering and powerful, with muscles rippling beneath its fur. John froze. His instincts screamed to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The creature paused, staring directly at him, its presence heavy and menacing. Then, as if deciding he wasn't worth the chase, it disappeared into the night, leaving only the oppressive silence in its wake. Shaken, John turned and rushed back to the safety of his home. The stories, now more than ever, seemed real. Bladenboro's legend was alive, and the Beast of Bladenboro was not just a myth. It was a creature that haunted the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike again. In the heart of North Dakota, where the flat plains stretch endlessly beneath a vast sky, there was a place known only to a few, Miniwashitu. It wasn't marked on any maps, and the stories surrounding it were less tangible, slipping through the cracks of history like dust in the wind. The legend spoke of strange lights, eerie sounds, and an ancient force that lurked in the shadows, a presence that had been whispered about by the local indigenous tribes for generations. One evening, as dusk fell over the prairie, a young man named Luke, driven by curiosity and a need for adventure, set out to find this place for himself. His friends had warned him against it, speaking in nervous tones about the unsettling experiences they had heard from others who had ventured too close. But Luke, armed with nothing more than a flashlight and a sense of bravado, ignored their concerns. The further Luke walked, the thicker the atmosphere became, and a strange heaviness settled over him. It was as though the world had become quieter, every sound muffled, and the air itself felt charged with an unsettling energy. When he finally arrived at the spot where Miniwashitu was said to lie, the sky above had darkened completely, and the stars seemed to flicker unnaturally. In the distance, Luke thought he saw what appeared to be a faint, glowing light dancing just beyond the horizon. He stepped forward, captivated by the strange sight, but the closer he got, the more the light seemed to move away from him, retreating as if teasing him. His heart began to race. He was no longer alone. A soft hum filled the air as the land itself was whispering, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Panic surged through him, and finally his legs moved, carrying him back through the fields, desperate to escape whatever force had drawn him there. By the time Luke reached the safety of his car, the lights were gone, leaving only the echo of the strange hum lingering in his mind. He never spoke of that night again, but the experience stayed with him, gnawing at him as he tried to rationalize what had happened. In the end, he knew one thing for sure. Miniwashitu was no myth. It was a place where the boundaries between the known and the unknown blurred, and sometimes legends were meant to be left undisturbed. On the outskirts of a small, forgotten town in Ohio, there stood a crumbly ruin known only as Gore Orphanage. Time had worn away much of its structure, leaving behind jagged walls and broken windows, but its dark history lingered like an unshakable shadow. The stories about this place were disturbing, whispers of mysterious fires, the unexplained deaths of children, and a haunting that refused to let go. One evening in the 1950s, a group of young thrill-seekers, eager to test their courage, made their way to the site. Among them was Justin, a skeptic who had always dismissed the tales as nothing more than local superstition. His friends spoke of the orphanage with a mix of fear and fascination, but Justin only chuckled, certain there was no ghostly force at work. The once grand structure loomed before them like a forgotten nightmare, its silhouette barely visible through the haze. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Justin remained unfazed, joking as he led the group through the creaking gates. They ventured inside, their footsteps echoing through the halls. The walls, stained with age and decay, seemed to whisper faintly as though carrying the memories of the orphanage's tragic past. A strange unease began to settle in, but Justin brushed it off, urging his friends deeper into the building. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the silence. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in their chest. A heavy door slammed shut somewhere in the distance. The group exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. The temperature dropped even further, and a faint cold breath seemed to brush past them, though no one was near enough to cause it. Then, in the dim light, they saw it. A shadow, indistinct but tall, moved swiftly across the room, vanishing through the broken frame of a doorway. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal, it was something else entirely. Something that had once called the orphanage home, perhaps. Justin, for the first time, felt the weight of the stories. The fear that had once seemed so foreign now gripped him. With shaking hands, he turned to leave, but the others were already running. They didn't need to say a word. The sense of dread was enough to send them all fleeing in terror. As they reached the safety of the road, Justin glanced back one last time. In the distance, the fog seemed to pulse, as though the orphanage was alive, waiting, watching. The ruins of Gore Orphanage were no longer just a place of local legend. They were a warning, a testament to the restless spirits that refused to be forgotten. Justin never returned to the site, but the memory of that night haunted him long after he left.